Hello everyone. If you've ever traveled by plane, you know that the takeoff and the landing are the most preoccupying moments of the entire flight, which isn't surprising at all since up to 70% of all accidents happen in these moments, and sometimes only the great skills of the pilot save the plane from falling and passengers from tragedy. These conquerors of the air are so cool that they're capable of the most incredible things. Ready to take a look at some of them? Then let's get it on. One of the most common problems for pilots when flying is climate, in particular wind. You might think that modern engines are so powerful that some cool breeze can't affect them in any way. Well, good for you. We're glad you're not having this phobia, but it's enough to see once how the pilots fight with gusts of wind, trying to carefully land the plane right on the lane to understand how difficult this is. Here's a huge A380 almost popping off the runway in Dusseldorf because of Storm Xavier. In the video, you can see how the lateral airflow caught the airliner already at the very ground and almost flipped it. Here's another side wind preventing a Boeing 767 from landing at the Prague airport, almost overturning it. The gusts were so strong that the pilots had to try to land twice in order to cope with the wind and protect the passengers. It's amazing that everything ended well. This time, the crew is fighting the windstorm Friederike that took over the Netherlands and Germany on January the 18th, 2018. The wind speed in the epicenter reached 140 km per hour, so most of the airports were closed, but some of them were still functioning, and they received pilots who already got up in the air. One of these airports was Dusseldorf. Here, the wind speed reached 110 km per hour, or about 30 meters per second, and believe us, that is very much. The twin-engine turboprop airliner Bombardier Q400 waggling in the air looks like it can't land at all, especially sideways. Now you're thinking there's nothing worse than wind, surely. But what about a sandstorm? Landing an airplane in the midst of a sandstorm sounds like an impossible mission because you simply can't see where to land at all when there's only sand and roaring wind around. Well, probably the human pilot was helped by the autopilot, or maybe he had some kind of aviation luck and special flair for the runway, because let's be honest, you can't rely only on electronic devices of the plane in the middle of such a storm like this. Of course, not only large liners have malfunctions, but small private planes too. As for example, in this case, the pilots of the tiny aircraft circled over the city for 1.5 hours after realizing his chassis was malfunctioning. It was necessary to waste all the fuel, otherwise the emergency landing could have ignited the craft. Fortunately, it did end well. Moreover, the landing was so soft that the plane literally slipped on the fuselage like a small boat for quite a few feet and then calmly stopped. You ask, why are we so sure the pilot wasn't hurt? Because look at him getting out of the cabin looking like he does this every day. I'll go get myself a burger. Oh, maybe even two. On December the 11th, 2013, a Makani Kai airplane flying from Kalaupapa to Honolulu crashed due to a failed single engine. The pilot was forced to land on the water, and perhaps this story would remain somewhere in Hawaii if it weren't for one of the passengers, fisherman Ferdinand Puentes, who accidentally filmed it all on a GoPro. Well, what else can you do when your plane's falling into the ocean, right? According to Ferdinand, 2 minutes after takeoff, the passengers heard a loud sound from the engine and immediately realized what was going to happen. When the aircraft descended on the water, the passengers managed to get out of the cabin, and the pilot, despite the injury received during the landing, kept giving instructions and preventing panic.
The worst fear of every air traveler. Side of the plane. Everybody okay?
The author of this video, which decided to fly over the state of Maine, claims this landing was quite soft. According to him, it wasn't exactly how it looks on the video. He just saw a road usually used by wood-producing equipment and decided to land on it. Wait, what? But we think it's kind of professional modesty. After all, ask any of our heroes and they'll probably tell you they were just doing their job. Nothing special. Still, this landing on the road looks incredibly impressive. You probably noticed that pilots try not to let the plane get out of the runway while landing. And you know, it's not because they don't want to ruin the lawn on the airport. Look what happens when malfunctioning chassis meets soil at a huge speed.
Airport now, and again, emergency crews are on the ground. He is in contact, and he's getting close. Sorry, Josh, he's coming in close. Oh, look at the sparks.
But thanks to the pilot, none of the passengers were hurt. On November 1st, 2011, a Boeing 767 of the Polish air company LOT flying from Newark, USA, was crash landing in Warsaw with a defective chassis. When we say defective, we mean it wasn't opening at all. Due to the failure of the central hydraulic system, not a single gear was out, so the pilots had to land the liner directly on the fuselage. After receiving information about the failure, the crew decided to waste as much fuel as possible to avoid a fire, and circled over the Polish capital for an hour. Airport services were notified of the problem, and during this time managed to prepare for an emergency landing. The emergency plane was met by fire trucks, ambulances, and buses. In addition, the runway was covered with a special foam to reduce the friction during landing. But everyone understood perfectly well that even such precautions might not help, because the risk is too great. When landing, there were sparks and smoke flying around, but the liner didn't catch fire. After the stop, all 220 passengers and 11 crew members were evacuated on inflatable ramps. As you've already noticed, the problem with the chassis is one of the most common in civil aviation. So on September 21st, 2005, the A320 plane flying to New York was forced to land at the Los Angeles airport because of the nose landing gear, whose wheel turned at a right angle. Since the A320 doesn't have an emergency fuel draining system, the pilots were forced to fly in circles over the ocean for 2 hours to get rid of it. The captain warned the stewards that the nose gear could break down when landing, and they prepared for the evacuation of the passengers. Finally, at 18:18, at a speed of 222 kilometers per hour, the aircraft touched the 3,382 meter long runway. The captain tried to keep the nose of the liner as high as possible in order to avoid the destruction of the nose landing gear. However, in the end, it did touch the concrete. The tires burst and caught fire, but soon went out. At 18:20, the plane completely stopped, having driven practically along the entire runway.
End of the runway.
Mighty strong landing gear here. That's the tires burning out there. The chin gear, the chin of that aircraft did not skid down the runway.
Despite the emergency, landing was very safe, and the pilot's work was done perfectly. None of the 146 people on board were injured. On August 21st, 1963, an almost new Tu-124 plane was flying from Tallinn to Moscow. There were 44 passengers and 6 crew members on board. It was the most usual morning flight, and everything seemed fine. But immediately after takeoff, the crew found that the front support of the chassis wasn't completely removed. It was necessary to land at the nearest airport, but to avoid a fire, the fuel had to be wasted as well. And so the captain began to fly around Leningrad at half a kilometer high, but suddenly one of the 2 engines stopped working. According to the readouts, there was enough fuel to get to the airport, but now it was necessary to fly straight through Leningrad instead of flying in circles. Suddenly, in the sky above the city, the second engine stopped working, and the fuel gauge for some reason showed 0. Although just a few minutes ago there was 200 liters. The crew didn't have time for thinking or hesitation. They had to land the aircraft on the river, and thanks to the pilot's actions, the water landing went surprisingly successfully. Not a single bottle was even broken broken on board. After the Tu-124 was towed to the shore and people descended onto the land, a few minutes later the plane sank. Psst, dude, are you looking for new technologies and great gadgets? Are your thoughts focused on the future? Do you love huge vehicles and can't imagine your life without robots around you? Then visit TechZone and you'll find all this and more. The link is in the description. You interested? Great.